Usually when you walk into a restaurant, there is basically one golden rule, right? The customer is always right.
Right, yeah. Pure supply and demand.
Exactly. Like if you want extra sauce, you get extra sauce. If you want a dish, mild instead of spicy, the chef accommodates you. You are paying, so you get exactly what you want, tailored perfectly to your palate.
And, that curation is really the bedrock of our entire consumer culture. You expect to be accommodated in almost every facet of modern life.
Which honestly raises a really uncomfortable question. What happens when that exact same consumer mindset creeps into an institution where it, fundamentally does not belong?
Oh, yeah. That's the big question.
Right. Like what happens when the person standing at the front of a room isn't supposed to be a chef taking your order, but a messenger delivering a hard, uncompromising truth? Today, welcome to the Deep Dive. We are unpacking a fiery, densely researched theological essay by Frank Leo. It's titled, When the Pastor Becomes Pasta, a biblical warning against the twisting and watering down of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
And it is a remarkable piece of writing. Just really dense and fascinating. And what's fascinating here is that, whether you share the author's religious background or you're just interested in how institutions sort of bend to the will of the crowd, his linguistic arguments are incredibly sharp.
Yeah, right from the jump, you see the author's name, Frank Leo, presented alongside its equivalents in Hebrew.
Right, Moshe Levi.
Yeah, Moshe Levi. And Greek, too, Phrekeskos Missos Louitekes, which, immediately signals that this document is going to strip away the English translations and really analyze the ancient text down to their structural bones.
Absolutely. It's getting into the linguistic weeds.
So just to set the ground rules for you listening, we're not here to take theological or political sides today. Our mission is just to impartially report on this fascinating linguistic breakdown and the author's critique of consumer culture. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Let's start with this central, slightly humorous, but really highly critical metaphor of the entire essay. The contrast between a traditional pastor and, a plate of pasta.
It's a great metaphor.
It is. According to the text, the sharp, two-edged sword of the original biblical text has essentially been replaced by a butter knife in modern pulpits. The Greek word for pastor is poimen, which translates directly to shepherd. But the author argues that today, the poimen has become pasta.
Which is, it's a brilliant bit of wordplay, but it has deep thematic resonance. Think about what pasta actually is.
Just carbs, really.
Right. At its core, it is a lifeless carbohydrate. It has almost no strong flavor of its own. It exists entirely to take on whatever sauce the consumer demands.
Yep.
So if a congregation wants a sweet, uplifting message, the pasta is served sweet. If they want mild, it's mild. If they want pure comfort food with absolutely no bite or intellectual challenge, the pasta obliges. The author is basically arguing that the living, active Word of God is being reduced to a manufactured dish, seasoned solely to the tastes of the audience.
And he roots this critique really deeply in a medical metaphor from the ancient texts, right? He points to the Apostle Paul's prophecy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where Paul warns about people having, quote, itching ears.
Yeah, and this is where the Greek gets so illuminating. The word Paul uses there is nothomenoi.
Nothomenoi.
Exactly. It comes from a root meaning to scratch or to tickle, but it operates as a very specific medical metaphor for a diseased ear that is afflicted with an itch.
Which I found myself wondering about the mechanics of that specific metaphor when I was reading, like, why an itch?
Well, think about how a rash actually works on a physiological level. The more you scratch an infected rash, the more you release histamines, right?
Which feels good for a second.
Exactly. Gives you a temporary dopamine hit of relief. But the act of scratching is actively worsening the underlying disease. It's spreading the infection. And the author suggests that consumer-driven teaching acts exactly like scratching a rash.
Wow.
Yeah, it provides a momentary feel-good hit of comfort, but it spiritually degrades the listener by ignoring the actual disease.
Reading that, I instantly thought of modern social media algorithms.
Oh, that's a good connection.
Because the text describes people actively heaping up, and the Greek word is episteuzomai.
Yes.
Heaping up teachers to scratch their itch. They turn away from truth to mythos, which the author defines not just as fairy tales, but as constructed, self-validating narratives. And isn't that exactly the psychological mechanism behind how we curate our news feeds?
It really is.
We build a mountain of voices, a heap of content creators who literally only tell us what we already believe.
Yeah.
We actively filter out friction.
That is a perfect modern equivalent.
Yeah.
And honestly, the grammar of the ancient Greek supports that mechanism perfectly. The verb nothomai is written in the middle or passive voice.
Okay, what does that signify?
In Greek, it signifies that the hearers are bringing this condition upon themselves. They aren't helpless victims being fed bad teaching by a rogue leader. They are actively demanding it. It's a classic supply and demand feedback loop. The congregation demands comfort, and a mountain of communicators steps up to supply the pasta. It creates what the author calls the consumer church.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second, though.
Sure.
Because if you take a modern communications course or like a public speaking seminar, one of the first absolute rules they teach you is know your audience.
Oh, yeah. Basic Comms 101.
Exactly. You are supposed to tailor your message so that it resonates with the people sitting in front of you. So why does the author argue that doing this in a church context is so dangerous? Like, why isn't tailoring the message just considered good, effective communication?
Well, in marketing or general public speaking, tailoring the message to reduce friction is just good business. You want to lower the barrier to entry. But the author cites the Apostle Paul in Galatians chapter 1 to show why this methodology is catastrophic in a theological context.
Okay.
Paul states that if anyone, even an angel from heaven, preaches a gospel contrary to the original, they are under an anathema.
Which is an incredibly intense word in antiquity.
It really is. It is the strongest possible term of condemnation available in the Greek text. It means to be devoted to destruction, essentially handed over to the wrath of God.
Wow.
Yeah. The author uses this to explain that the message isn't the pastor's personal property. It's not a corporate brand that you can just modify or rebrand to fit quarterly market trends or demographic shifts. To tamper with it is to cross a severe line, inviting the highest level of judgment.
You know, when I was going through the source, I hit this moment involving the Gospel of Matthew that honestly threw me for a loop.
Oh, the translation discrepancy.
Yes. The author starts talking about the consequences of watering down the message, and he points to Matthew 5.19. In the standard Greek text, Jesus says that whoever loosens, and the Greek word is lysi, the commandments, will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. The Greek word there is elekistos.
Right. The absolute minimum rank.
Exactly. And he also points out that a lot of modern pastors look at that verse and use it to rationalize their methods. They essentially say, well, okay, I might be loosening the hard truths to get more people in the door, to be more welcoming, but hey, if the penalty is just being the least in heaven, I'm still in heaven. It's a minor demotion. I can live with that trade-off.
A calculated risk.
Right. But then the author brings in this obscure Hebrew text, the Vatican manuscript, Vambry 100, to completely contradict that reading. And I was completely lost here, to be honest. If the Greek says least, why is the author pulling a Hebrew manuscript out of the Vatican archives to change the meaning?
It really comes down to the linguistic and cultural context of the first century. Jesus and his disciples spoke Aramaic and Hebrew, while the New Testament was written in Greek to reach the broader Greco-Roman world. Greek sometimes struggles to capture the sheer severity and idiomatic weight of ancient Hebrew thought. Yeah, so scholars study Hebrew manuscripts of Matthew, like the Vatican Hebrew 100, because they often preserve the raw Jewish cultural worldview that the Greek translation might have, smoothed over.
Okay, so what does that specific Hebrew manuscript reveal about this verse then?
Well, in this Hebrew tradition, the consequence for loosening the commandments is not about being called the least. The Hebrew word used is yaved. It comes from the root avad, which means to perish, to be destroyed, to be utterly lost.
Wait, really?
Yes, it is the exact same root used throughout the Hebrew Bible to describe total annihilation.
That is a staggering shift in stakes.
It changes everything. The text is not saying you get a lower rank in a heavenly hierarchy. It is warning that the leader who intentionally waters down the truth to please itching ears will be destroyed. They will lose their soul.
Wow.
Yeah, the rationalization completely collapses.
Going from a slap on the wrist to total destruction is terrifying, and the author couples that linguistic discovery with some incredibly visceral imagery from Revelation chapter 3. He talks about the church in Laodicea.
Oh, right, the lukewarm church.
Yeah. Historically, Laodicea was a wealthy, comfortable, self-satisfied city, and their church reflected that. Christ tells them that because they are lukewarm, he is going to vomit them out of his mouth. The Greek word is emisai. It's a really graphic, nauseating image.
And look at the mechanics of how something actually becomes lukewarm. You have to actively mix the extremes.
Yes, that's exactly it. The author points out that when you take the hot fire of a hard, uncompromising truth and you intentionally mix it with the cold water of cultural compromise.
Yeah.
You don't get a refreshing, balanced drink. You get a tepid, nauseating porridge.
Yeah.
The institution thinks it is being balanced and approachable, but the text argues it is actually inducing spiritual nausea.
So if the pasta pastor is the counterfeit, the one serving this nauseating porridge, the source pivots to provide a blueprint for the real thing, right? What does a true pastor look like when stripped of all this consumer pressure?
Yeah, the document dedicates a significant portion to the positive model,
Yeah.
starting in the Gospel of John chapter 10 with the concept of the Good Shepherd. But again, the English word good is just so weak compared to the original. The Greek word used is kalos.
And kalos is a fascinating word because it doesn't just mean morally acceptable or proficient. It relates to aesthetics. It means noble. It means beautiful.
Okay.
The text argues that this nobility is intrinsically tied to a willingness to suffer loss. A true pastor, a kalos shepherd, has to be willing to lose popularity, to lose their income, to lose their platform entirely for the true welfare of the sheep.
Right.
They give the flock what they need to survive, not what they want to consume, even if it costs the shepherd everything.
It is the ultimate anti-consumer model. And the author contrasts this with a stark warning from Ezekiel 34, pronouncing woe on shepherds who feed themselves instead of the flock. The document makes this piercing observation. If a communicator is adjusting their message primarily to grow their audience, protect their brand, and secure their salary, they aren't feeding the sheep.
They are harvesting them. They are feeding themselves.
Which is a profound critique of institutional self-preservation. And to show just how difficult this actual mandate is, the text breaks down the triad of duties Paul gives to the preacher in 2 Timothy 4.2, which are reprove, rebuke, and exhort.
Okay, let's be pragmatic here for a second, though. When you look at those three words, reprove, rebuke, exhort, 2 out of the 3 are inherently negative or confrontational.
Right.
That means 2/3 of the job description is to deliver hard, uncomfortable news. But how do you sustain an institution with that model? The light bill needs to be paid. The doors need to stay open. Doesn't the author realize that leaning into harsh rebukes is going to drive the modern consumer away? How does the source reconcile the survival of the institution with this 2/3 negative rule?
Well, the author reconciles it by arguing that the survival of the institution is actually not the pastor's primary responsibility.
Yeah, that is the sacrifice of the kalos shepherd. If the institution shrinks because the truth is preached, that is considered a victory in this textual framework, whereas growing a massive institution by serving pasta is considered a catastrophic failure.
It completely inverts our modern metrics for success.
It does. And to illustrate this, the source brings in an analogy from modern theologian John MacArthur. He states, "The preacher is not a chef, he's a waiter. God doesn't want you to make the meal, he just wants you to deliver it to the table without messing with it."
I love that waiter analogy because it so perfectly strips away the ego. If you think about it in secular terms, it's exactly how we view, say, a climate scientist or a corporate whistleblower.
Oh, that's an interesting parallel.
Right. Like, if you are a climate scientist gathering data on rising temperatures, you aren't a chef inventing a recipe. You are a waiter delivering the readings. If you change the data, if you lower the temperature reading so the public isn't frightened, you have failed your fundamental duty to reality.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the author is applying that exact same objective rigor to ancient theology.
That connection is spot on, and it links directly to the Greek concept of oikonomos, used in 1 Corinthians.
Oikonomos.
Yes. Oikonomos means a steward or a manager of someone else's household. The pastor is managing an estate that does not belong to him. The doctrines are not his to redesign based on consumer feedback. His only required qualification is to be utterly faithful to the owner's original instructions.
What's really striking about this source is that it refuses to frame this purely as a 21st century problem. Like, it's so easy to blame social media algorithms or the American megachurch movement for this consumer mindset. But the author tracks this exact same battle across history and across continents, really proving that the temptation to turn a pastor into pasta is a universal human flaw.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author brings in 3 historical giants to map this trajectory. He starts in the 1880s in the United Kingdom with Charles Spurgeon. Spurgeon fought what became known as the downgrade controversy.
What exactly was happening in the 1880s that triggered this? I mean, no social media back then.
Right, but think about the Victorian era. You have the explosion of the Industrial Revolution, the rise of modernism, and the introduction of Darwinian evolutionary theory.
Oh, sure.
The intellectual class of society was shifting rapidly. Spurgeon saw his denomination feeling immense pressure to make Christianity more palatable to this new, modern, scientific world. They wanted to shave off the supernatural elements, the hard edges of sin and judgment, just to remain respectable in Victorian polite society.
Wow. So the exact same impulse.
Exactly. Spurgeon warned that biblical truth is like a steep, slippery mountain. Take one step away from the peak to make the climb easier for the public, and you are instantly on an unstoppable downgrade.
And then fast forward a century, and you see that exact same pressure mutating in the American context. The text highlights John MacArthur, who we mentioned earlier with the waiter analogy. MacArthur spent decades fighting the market-driven philosophy of the 1980s and 90s seeker-sensitive movement. He argued that catering to what people want usually starts innocently enough as a methodological passion. Leaders think, well, we just want to reach more people, let's use market research. But MacArthur argues that methodology inevitably becomes a theological aberration. The method eventually changes the message.
And then, to show that this isn't just a Western phenomenon, the author includes the perspective of modern Asian theologian Pastor Stephen Tong. Operating in a completely different cultural context, Pastor Tong insists that the gospel doesn't become unnecessary just because times progress. And its standards don't lower just because the surrounding culture changes.
Yeah.
His thesis is that the goal of the church is to transform the culture from above, not lower its own standards to become relevant.
The sociological pattern is just undeniable.
It is. The author uses these three diverse figures, Victorian England, modern America, and modern Asia, to demonstrate that the pressure to accommodate culture is hardwired into human sociology. The temptation to serve a comfortable plate of pasta instead of wielding a sharp sword is a timeless occupational hazard of leadership.
So bringing all of these linguistic deep dives and historical threads together, what does this ultimately mean?
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
The core thesis of Frank Leo's document is that the pastification of the pulpit is not a minor stylistic trend or a clever marketing pivot. The author presents it as a terminal cancer eating at the vital organs of the Protestant church. He challenges believers to look at their own leadership structures and ask with absolute holy seriousness, is my church led by a pastor or by a pasta?
And, if you are listening to this and you operate entirely outside the religious sphere, the mechanics of this critique are still deeply applicable to your everyday life.
Oh, 100%.
This text serves as a masterclass in media literacy and institutional analysis. It trains you to recognize the exact moment when leaders, journalists, or politicians shift from speaking hard, necessary truths to simply serving the demographic comfort food that their audience demands to keep the metrics high. It forces us to interrogate the motives of the voices we rely on.
Are we looking for a shepherd to guide us through dangerous terrain, or are we just looking for a chef to satisfy our cognitive cravings? Which I think brings us to our final thought for you, the listener, to mull over today.
Yeah, a really good question to end on.
Look at the voices you trust most in your own life right now. Whether that's the news outlets you consume, the professional mentorship you seek, or the political leadership you follow. When was the last time they told you something that fundamentally challenged your worldview?
That's tough.
Are they occasionally serving you the hard, uncomfortable truths you actually need to hear? Or have you, perhaps without even realizing it, actively curated a life where the customer is always right and you are only ever served pasta?
It is a question that requires some serious self-reflection.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.